Lower throttle up.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Welcome to Fort Worth Esoteric Masonic Podcast, where we wade into the deep end of the pool for the more spiritually minded Mason.
Nice to be in orbit.
The statements of our guest and host do not represent the stance of any lodge or Grand Lodge.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the latest episode of the Fort Worth Masonic Podcast. My name is Gabe Jagush, and I am, for now, the Worshipful Master of Fort Worth Lodge.
My name is Billy Hamilton. I am the Junior Past Master for another couple of days.
And we have a special guest with us today.
So I'm Angel Millar. I'm the author of The 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality and Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos. And I'm also currently the Editor-in-Chief of Fraternal Review.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on to the show with us, Angel.
Thank
we
you.
Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Likewise.
So, Angel, if you wouldn't mind, actually, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself outside the Masonic lens?
Outside of Freemasonry?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, like
Sure.
who is Angel, the normal human being, or at least when you're pretending to be a normal human being like the rest of us do?
Yeah, well, I seem to spend a lot of time writing, so that's probably what I'm doing most of all. Other than that, work out, do some martial arts, although that's been a little sketchy since coronavirus, but working out, writing, this would be the meditating, of course. Those would be the main things, and seeing friends, that's about it.
Okay. What kind of martial arts do you practice?
Well, I practice Kung Fu, but I probably will take up something else in the near future, actually.
We also get into a little bit about how you came to Masonry. So what brought your attention to the craft?
Yeah, so I grew up in England. I live in the US now, and I've lived here for over 2 decades. But I grew up in England, and at that time, there was still some kind of general perception about Freemasonry, although very distorted. And I had heard growing up that it was a club for businessmen and politicians, and they rolled their trouser legs up, and it sounded thoroughly tedious, to be honest. And then when I was around, I would have been 18 at the time, I'd already got into, dare I say it, magic and the occult and esotericism and neo-paganism and religion, and I was trying to find my way through that world. And a friend of mine mentioned or said that Freemasons practice ceremonial magic, and I thought that can't be true, but any society that can be described as being a kind of tedious club for politicians and businessmen and ceremonial magic must be pretty interesting. And it just so happened that a few months later, I was in Greenwich Market, and there was a used bookstore there, and they had some Masonic ritual books for sale, and I looked through them, and I bought the British Rose Choir ritual. And a little bit after that, I got hold of the Royal Arch degree as well. And I didn't really understand the Royal Arch degree. There's actually a lot more in the English one than there is in the American one, actually, which is more Platonic openly. And I didn't really understand it entirely, but it struck me that it was more intelligent than most of the things that I was coming across, and certainly in practical terms. And I just hung on to those books. I read little bits about Freemasonry throughout the years, picked up books here and there. Most of them probably were not very good. But then when I moved to New York, the only books I couldn't bring very much, but I brought a number of books, and half were on martial arts and half were on Freemasonry. So I decided at that point that it would be a good time to approach the fraternity and inquire about being initiated. And I was initiated in 2001 into Publicity Lodge in New York City after a little bit of delay of paperwork.
So it's interesting, actually, that you say that there was this perception of, I guess, Freemasonry being involved in ritual magic, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot, especially because we've had a lot of authors that are known primarily for being ritual magicians on past podcasts. Right. And they're all Freemasons. And so I think a lot of people, the average Freemason especially, doesn't really think of that connection there.
Right. Yeah. And you'd like me to comment on that?
I love it. Yeah. Actually.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, a lot of people think that I'm practicing magic. I have my own practices. I might have regarded myself as sort of overlapping onto the world of magic at one point, certainly when I was in my youth, my misguided youth. But now I kind of see myself as very much outside of that, though it is an interest of mine, sort of culturally and intellectually. If you want to look at the history of the connection, I mean, certainly during the 17th century, you get these little sort of little mentions of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism somehow being together. What that means exactly is open to interpretation, and it's certainly not what it would mean to us today. Rosicrucianism was more of a, to be blunt, a sort of Christian Lutheran Hermetic fusion, a kind of in a sense an attempt to revive certain aspects of German culture originally, and was entirely Protestant and not open to other religions at all, and certainly would not have favored much of what goes on in the name of Rosicrucianism today. But more substantially, if you look at the 18th century, once Freemasonry spreads across continental Europe, the idea that it's from Great Britain and from the building trade is not. Although obviously Freemasonry intrigues a lot of people and it becomes this sort of massive phenomenon. At the same time, that is not, we could say, not emotionally or spiritually satisfying for people. And so you get all of these different Freemasons creating their own rites, such as the Asiatic Reverend, the Strict Observance, and so on. And they draw in all of these other influences that really had no home beyond the intellectual sphere. So, so people would be writing about alchemy or Rosicrucianism, but there wasn't really an practical alchemical movement or a practical Rosicrucian movement where people were meeting to do Rosicrucianism. These things were largely intellectual, and it was mostly intellectuals in one country writing to another, or writing for an audience in another country. It wasn't really practical, but Freemasonry allowed all of this stuff to be absorbed, and then you could create these higher degrees and you draw in alchemy, and now you could have these alchemical initiations or Rosicrucian-like initiations. And then, of course, once that happens, most of these orders and these rites just die away. Some of them are retained in the Scottish Rite later on, and then of course there's more people interested in metaphysics and spirituality join Freemasonry. Some of them get the idea that, okay, I went through the Scottish Rite or whatever it was, or I joined the Societas Rosicruciana and I learned about Kabbalah, but I want to do the Kabbalah. So then they create their own rites, such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, or the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was originally conceived of as a Masonic rite in Germany, and then later became this sort of occult rite. And now they kind of deny any contemporary connection to Freemasonry. So that's really that. Historically speaking, anyway.
I guess going back to, you had talked about, you had come across the ritual for the Rose Croix, in
Right.
Which is in America it would be the Scottish Rite. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the Royal Arch. So are you a member of either of those appended bodies?
So a couple of years after being initiated, I went through the Royal Arch. I went through the York Rite, apart from the cryptic degrees. I went through and took the Order of the Temple. But I didn't take the Scottish Rite degrees, mostly because I've read multiple different versions of every single Scottish Rite degree, so I kind of know what it's about. And there are different reasons for me not taking it, but one reason certainly is I really need to focus on what I'm doing. I'm really doing too much already, and there's just not enough time in the day, and I don't really need to know the little bits about Kabbalah or whatever that's in the Scottish Rite. I already have other things that are comparable, one might say.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got to have enough bandwidth to live your life.
Yeah, that's right, definitely.
I did want to talk about something that was in the 3 stages of initiatic spirituality.
Yeah.
And it goes back to kind of, you were talking about the Societas Rosicruciana. One of the comments in there that you make pretty early on was that American Freemasonry embodies the archetypes of the craftsman, holy warrior, mystic, through the craft, lodge degrees, Order of the Temple, and Scottish Rite, respectively.
Right.
And you state that, that was actually originally stated, I guess, by William Moore in Masonic Temple.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And you said that you believe that it was basically correct, though it overlooks the SRICF.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, I guess when you say it overlooks the SRICF, what are your thoughts on that? Where does SRICF fit into it?
Yeah, well, that would, if you break down the different Masonic orders in relation to the craftsman, warrior, magician, then the Societas Rosicruciana would very definitely be in the magician camp for sure. I mean, more so than the Scottish Rite, I think. But yeah. But, all of these archetypes somewhat overlap as well. So, if you say that the craft lodge, it represents the craftsman, which is obviously true. And nevertheless, we have a Tyler with a sword at the door, which is the warrior. You have the sword pointing at the naked heart, which again would be the warrior. So, there is and has to be some overlap between these archetypes, and that's always the case. You find them throughout history and before history, really.
So, in the 3 stages of initiatic spirituality, one of the concepts that you present right at the very beginning of the book is this idea of ritual initiation as spiritual technology or as spiritual machinery of some kind, where tools are used as symbols, and you have, you went into the discussion of, these gigantic oversized ritual axes and stuff. Can you talk about the idea of I really like the visual, the mental visual of spiritual technology or spiritual machinery. Can you talk about ritual initiation in that function?
Yeah, so the ritual initiation is a kind of a machinery to transform non-initiates into initiates, right? Or in Masonic terminology, the rough ashlar into the perfect ashlar, or at the very least, we could say, to turn the sort of rough individual into a person who is capable of applying lessons to himself to refine himself over a period of many years to perfect himself, hopefully, at least eventually. And in regard to Freemasonry and some other orders, the main way of doing this, of course, is through symbolism. And ritual enactments. And I think Freemasonry is kind of interesting in that the symbols that are presented are of mundane significance originally. So, a trowel. A trowel is just for applying cement at building site, right? Or or in England, a pencil, for example, is just for making marks, or even the tracing board is just an architect's diagram, basically. And when you think about Zen Buddhism, although very different, Zen Buddhism, unlike many other traditions, is really the idea that you find awakening, or you become awakened in your daily life. So, for example, maybe you become awakened as you're sweeping leaves because you're focused on it, breathing, and you have this experience, or the same Zen experience can be had in martial arts, painting, calligraphy, even cutting up meat. If you're really practicing Zen Buddhism, you're practicing the way. And so everything becomes a potential for some kind of awakening. And I think in Freemasonry, what the ritual is doing is kind of representing the world as a kind of spiritual place, or at least the place where spirituality and spiritual awakening is possible. So things that look mundane represent higher ideals or transcendent ideals, or can represent the divine itself in some way. And if you look at the tarot, and the tarot obviously began as a kind of as a card game, not as a divination system. But the idea implicit in it, of course, is that you can have ordinary scenes and they have transcendent meaning. So maybe it's a scene of, let's say, the Five of Wands, where it's 5 individuals battling with 5 wooden staffs. It's not just, in theory at least, it's not just a particular scene, but it represents something in the psyche, or something that's going on at the time. So maybe it's sort of internal mental battling or something like that. And so implicit in the Masonic ritual, and maybe in some other traditions, is the idea that the earthly is, in a sense, the machine for becoming an awakened spiritual or divine being, or coming in contact with the divine. And again, as I say, we have this in Zen, where it's through the ordinary that you become awakened. And so I think that really is the spiritual technology in relation to Freemasonry, that it kind of views the world as a machine for the potential transformation of the individual in regard to the divine, and the actual ritual itself is a kind of crystallization of that it actually shows you, okay, these mundane objects have transcendent value, and that you can apply the lessons to you spiritually or morally or metaphysically or whatever have you.
Now, do you feel that in a spiritual machine, when it comes to the spiritual technology of Freemasonry, is the meaning behind, are the specific meanings behind the different working tools important in and of themselves, or is the more important thing the recontextualization of those tools as kind of vehicles to the divine in your everyday world?
Right. I think you're asking me, does it matter that they mean something specific, or simply that they have some kind of transcendent meaning, whatever it might be? Is that right?
I think so, right? Does the specific meaning matter versus, hey, this allows us to look at life completely differently?
Well, both are important. I have to say, although my misbegotten youth, much of it I look back as kind of silly now, but or dangerous. But when I was around 17, I came across, to cut a long story short, this kind of neo-pagan guru figure, and while there was sort of much bad about him, even looking back decades later, I can say one really good thing was that he definitely gave me the feeling that there is something sacred, that there is something beyond the world of shopping malls and 9 to 5 and whatever have you, and there's something sort of implicitly sort of strange and sacred and magical in the world and in nature and in just in our natural being. And so that's important in itself today, of course, especially as if you look around, people are fanatical about politics, very divisive. They don't think about these things; they just absorb them from whatever TV channel they watch, and are sort of caught up in this world mentally, which is sort of manipulating them actually. And it's important for us just to get back to what is it to be human, first of all, before we can even begin to think about spirituality. And so that the ritual presents this world view as this world is a spiritual world. In Zen terms, samsara is nirvana, is already a kind of massive shock to the system for most people. But of course, the meanings themselves are essential. And I think any Freemason would say that hopefully they've been able to apply the lessons of Freemasonry in some way, if they weren't already. The 24-inch gauge, trying to live your life in a balanced way, for example. Maybe you can't break it up, as alluded, into 8-hour segments, but you can spend some time on work, some time on spiritual practice, some time on relaxation or rest or health, etc. So the actual meanings do matter, most definitely. I would say furthermore, if you think about something that's not a Masonic symbol, but I think it's a good example, and I often give it, let's say the gentleman's suit, or what we misguidedly call the business suit. Which most people, most members are going to wear to lodge. You think about that and you think, well, why do people wear a suit? And most people would say, well, it makes you look smart, right? Well, then the question is, well, how or why? But if you take a suit jacket apart, which I have done in my younger years, you discover that the suit is really strange. The sleeve is made of 2 pieces for a start, and it's curved in a certain way. The arm is actually bigger than the armhole. All these strange things are going on. And if you take it apart, you find there's all this sort of material under the chest. And what the suit is actually doing, it's holding the human figure in an upright position, but the arms are slightly bent in a natural curve at the side. And any deviation from this upright position, and the suit will start to crease, meaning it won't look as good. You think, well, what does upright mean? Well, on the one hand, if you ever are on the subway or a train, you see somebody slouching, their feet are up on the seats, you don't get the feeling that this is the upright man you're looking at. You kind of think, I should probably move away from this person who's probably, maybe not dangerous, but, not someone I want to be around, might try to cause trouble or something, or semi-criminal, whether that's fair or not. But when we look at people who look sort of too slovenly, we think that represents their mind. Also, when you stand in an upright position or you sit upright, you look more like the upright man, meaning morally. And so there are three meanings to the word upright, of course. So one is standing upright, one is morally upright, and the other one is upright, meaning a vertical in geometry. And all 3 of those meanings are important to Freemasonry, of course. And I think just taking the idea of, the physical upright, standing upright, and the upright man, what that suggests is there's some kind of relationship between the physical world and the sort of mental or the spiritual. The soul, the body and the soul are somehow working together, and it would seem to be, and the ritual would imply, that this is the case not just in human beings, but throughout all things, so that a trowel isn't just a trowel. It's also suggesting to you the idea of cementing 2 things together, or bringing things together that may be even opposite. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it does, and it went beyond in a way that I found really fantastic. The example of the suit as that not only does it shape your body, but it shapes your thoughts. That's kind of a great example there.
Yeah, and not just shapes your thoughts, but it's the idea. Why do we use the term upright to mean moral? Because we could have used another term to mean moral, right? So it's the idea that there's morality, the mind, the consciousness, the soul somehow is reflected in and embodied in the physical being. So the upright man doesn't slouch, right? You see someone slouching, you don't say that's the upright man. The upright man is shoulders back, diaphragm up, chin up, and has ways of behaving as well. He's not hysterical or shouting, obviously, calm, confident, etc. But it's the idea implicit, and it's implicit in the suit as well, right? Okay, maybe the creators of the suit didn't think about this consciously, but subconsciously we know there's some kind of connection between the soul or spirit or mind or consciousness or personality and the physical being. And then in ritual, we kind of extend this to all things, or we acknowledge that this is the case not just with the human being, but with even inanimate things. So these things that are inanimate, and we kind of take for granted the world, that we don't even take any notice of it. We sort of walk by it every day thinking to ourselves, lost in our own thoughts. This stuff that we ignore also has some kind of transcendent meaning. And the most basic and uninteresting of things, a trowel, for example, can have some kind of, sublime meaning to it if you pay attention to what is implied.
So something that you said in regards to, the spiritual and the physical mirroring each other kind of leads me to one of my next questions. In the section of 3 stages where you discuss the craftsman, one of the ideas that you present in terms, kind of in the context of ritual discussion, is to reenact, is to re-embody a memory, and then you go on to discuss, the duality and this very familiar concept of as above, so below that a lot of Masons are familiar with. And you discuss also in the warrior section this concept of somatic initiation and, self-remembering and physical training of the body. Can you talk to us about the relationship that spiritual training and physical training have with each other?
Sure. So in the modern world, in the modern Western world, of course, these things have become totally disassociated, so that if spiritual people think that they need to be weak, or weak people are attracted, physically weak people are attracted to spirituality. And I say this as I was once a 17-year-old man with long hair listening to Led Zeppelin, and incredibly skinny. I'm pretty slim now, but incredibly skinny. And I'm sure that was partly why I was attracted to it myself. But it's a big mistake to think that, as the majority of quote unquote spiritual people do, that the body is just nothing and you can let it go. And who cares if you're obese or you're physically unfit? And, of course, it's absurd on the face of it, because if you have an unhealthy body, then you will have an unhealthy mind. Everybody knows that when they get sick, their thoughts are cloudy, they can't think the same things, they don't have clarity of thinking. But if your body is always sick to a certain degree, well, then you'll always have thoughts that are a little bit sick as well. You won't be able to think optimally. And it's simply ridiculous to think that these things are in some way disassociated, because they're not. There's this cliche going around now that we're human beings having we're spiritual beings having a human experience. Well, if that's the case, it's the human part that counts, right? If I go to a movie theater to experience the movie, I should really pay attention to the movie. I'm not the movie, but that's why I go to experience it. So if we're spiritual beings having a human experience, it's the human that's really important. And then, and again, that's because it's from a spiritual perspective, this is part of the machine for transcendence, whether people like it or not. And, allowing yourself to be sick, not looking after yourself. Why is 8 hours of the day supposed to be dedicated to relaxation for Freemasons? And well, all of the current science shows that if you don't get enough sleep, all kinds of horrible things are happening in your body. It's part of the reason why some people are obese. That's part of the reason why some people get very serious sicknesses. People cannot, despite what they think, they're unable to concentrate and make good decisions after getting a lack of sleep. So, it really does matter. And, this, if you look at spiritual gurus, for example, who say no, sexual denial is great and you mustn't have sex or whatever. Almost invariably, these same gurus are hitting on all of their attractive female disciples, or they tell their disciples, no sexual relationship is very bad for you, and then it's discovered later on after they die they had a sexual relationship for 20 years. This is just completely common, and better than being a hypocrite. And okay, we're all hypocritical to a certain degree, we're all trying to get better, but well, hopefully, but at the same time, if you're a truly spiritual person, you should be able to acknowledge, as Zen Buddhism does, samsara is nirvana, or as Freemasonry does, things have a transcendent significance. So what is your unhealthy body signifying, if not a healthy spirit or an unhealthy spirit or unhealthy mind? So, getting healthy is not, many quote-unquote spiritual people think that, well, I'm doing my spiritual stuff, so I don't need to be healthy because that's the body, it's disgusting. But actually, that's the foundation. That's before you even get to the spiritual stuff, really. And, anybody who's interested in spirituality should be working out and practicing some kind of physical training at an absolute minimum. Because, not to go off at a tangent, but a lot of people ask me about inner alchemy practices, which is, stimulating inner energy in the body and circulating it through the body. Well, if you have an unhealthy body to begin with, you can forget that. That's just like the little cherry on the top of the cake. It's everything else that is the substance. You have to do the basic work. In medieval Europe, and even into the pilgrims who came across to America early on, they had a notion of the four elements, and of course the four elements. It goes back to ancient Greece and even to the pre-Socratic thinkers, but it was part of the worldview of the medieval and even into the Renaissance period. But these elements would affect not only the personality and the body, but would also affect food and diet as well. And so all of these things, these sort of metaphysical ideas, the creation itself, it's all linked to, affects the body as well in classical societies. And this idea that they are somehow separated and the body's no good is completely absurd.
And I think we see elements of that early on with the Greek philosophers, right? Plato. Plato wasn't his real name. He was called Plato because he was a wrestler and his shoulders were so broad. And Socrates or Socrates, depending on what side of the pond you're on, has this great quote: "No citizen has a right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. What a disgrace it is for a man to grow old without ever seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable."
Yeah, that's right.
I kind of love that.
Yeah, and Plato said that, the education of the youth had to be through music, philosophy, and wrestling. And if you look at, say, Miyamoto Musashi, famous, probably Japan's most famous samurai, he was also a painter, calligrapher, gardener, which he was renowned for. Egil Skallagrimsson, probably the most feared Viking ever, was also a renowned poet. classically speaking, what we might call the higher man, or what the Chinese call the Chanzu, the superior person, would develop themselves physically and spiritually, or physically, spiritually, and culturally. This was normal. And you think about Freemasonry. We're told to study the 7 liberal arts, but there's coming back to the Tyler, there's also an element of self-defense. The classical, gentlemen of Great Britain and Europe of that time, early 18th century and before, learned the 7 liberal arts, but also learned, wrestling and sword fighting for self-defense, and went to church and studied, the Bible or whatever have you. So you see it's the body, the mind, and the spirit.
Yeah,
as throughout history.
Anybody that was, kind of in the camp of what we'll describe as broadly described as influential young men of some kind would have, in addition to all those things, have been expected to be a very good sporting pugilist, a fencer of some kind.
That's
and so you do present this, there's that kind of balance that is presented in 3 stages where, you've cited the higher man, right, where he's balancing these beautiful arts with this deadly precision in his weaponry and his fighting skill. And so there is that kind of, we have those examples of historical figures who very clearly were balancing the craftsman archetype with the warrior archetype. But it seems like we might not have a whole lot of examples of historical figures that balanced all 3, the craftsman, the warrior, and the magician. Is that something that we are yet to see, or is that maybe just there's less people that did that we can point to as examples?
Yeah, well, certainly that's more of the elite of the society. But, coming back to Plato, who said that education should be through music, philosophy, and wrestling. Well, music is craft, philosophy is the magician, and wrestling is the warrior. And you do find that throughout history in different cultures, and even in Sufism, for example, Sufi guilds were formed during the 12th century. Before that, they were sort of wandering mystics, and during that time, the structure of the trade guild with apprentices and a master was adopted for the Sufi guild, so that would be the craft. The magician, obviously, would be the spiritual side, Islamic mysticism, and the warrior was drawn in. They drew in the chivalric code of Islam, Fatawa. Fatawa is usually translated as chivalry, but the literal translation is young manhood. So actually, you do find that these 3 archetypes are embodied in, I would say, in the more developed societies, especially among the elite, and even, for example, in sticking with Islam, for example, in the gymnasiums of the Shiite wrestling, Pahlavi, sometimes referred to as Zerkana, in the gymnasiums there, which are built on the sort of archetype of the Sufi shrine. In there, you always find a painting of Ali, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. Ali was also the first to accept Islam. And in there, you always find a painting of Ali on the wall. Not Muhammad, but Ali. And Ali is regarded as the exemplar of both mystical truths and of the warrior, the great chivalric warrior. So very much you do find these things together, actually, in my opinion.
Yeah, perhaps I was, and it may be that I was looking at a more decidedly Western perspective, right? Which is that is a flaw within the general populace of the Western esoteric tradition, is that a lot of times we tend to look within our little realm and don't look a lot towards the Middle East and other regions like that.
Well, Plato is certainly Western, and even in modern times, someone like Aleister Crowley is a lot more controversial, obviously. But ceremonial magicians are obviously magic. A rider, you could say that's magic if you like, or you could say it's craft. But he was also a painter and became fairly accomplished when he was living in Germany as a fine art painter, so that's craft. And he was also a mountaineer and a boxer, so I would say that would be the warrior. So you do find this. It's just these elements are neglected. No one wants to talk about Crowley the boxer because people who are attracted to ceremonial magic and spirituality are very often or very usually just trying to reject the body and get away from a society that thinks that the physical strength is important, although certainly that is no longer the case in general society.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who have who take a lot of inspiration from Crowley often forget that he probably was one of the most prolific writers in the West on the practice of yoga, and so they kind of lose sight of that.
Yeah, well, yoga wasn't half a yoga, but I mean that came later on, despite what people say. It was really yoga as meditation. So.
Now, one of the things that is kind of presented in three stages is this idea that, obviously we all embody different different archetypes at different times, but there's maybe a kind of a transition from one archetype to another, right, where the craftsman gives way to the warrior, gives way to the magician, and then gives way to the craftsman again, and there's this kind of we shift back and forth from these different archetypes. What are these things that, like on a long scale term, where you say, you are identifiably a craftsman for a long period of time, and then you shift to living your life primarily dominated by the warrior archetype, then primarily dominated by the magician archetype. What do you find are the triggering events or the triggering experiences that cause somebody to shift from one archetype dominated life to another archetype dominated life? Yeah,
well, so I mean the point is really to integrate these three, right? So Plato wouldn't say be a musician for 10 years and then take up wrestling and then philosophy. You're supposed to practice these things together. And again in Zen Buddhism and in Japanese society traditionally, you would find, let's say, someone who's an expert or a master swordsman practicing calligraphy or painting at the same time and saying that the brush and the sword are one thing. And the techniques can be similar, of course, with breathing and moving the arms, otherwise you breathe and so on, entering a state of no mind. So the idea is not to shift from one to the next, but to embody them together and to see relationships between them. The late samurai manual, the Hagakura, says that if you are, as you become more and more knowledgeable about other ways, you should be more and more sort of conscious and at home with your own ways. So if you're a swordsman and you learn about calligraphy, or you learn about the tea ceremony, or you learn about flower arranging, that's still going to tell you something about sword fighting. You might learn something about sword fighting from flower arranging, or if you're a master flower arranger and you take up sword fighting, you might learn something about flower arranging from sword fighting. So these things are integrated and integral. I mean, I'm sure that human beings can go from one stage to the next, but that's not really ideal. I would say it's more likely that societies go from one stage to the next. So you have let's say the craftsman in the Industrial Revolution. You have the warrior in World War wars, and then you have the magician in the sort of hippie era, and and this sort of cycling through these archetypes is more of a societal phenomenon. And I would say that the individual, one of the reasons why you want to develop all three of these archetypes is because the society itself is always in a state of change and is inherently unstable, and you need to be able to respond to this and make sure that you're not taken down with it if it declines and collapses, which is my
questions we usually ask in the beginning, and we skip this time, is from the positions in what you've written about, not just in this book, but throughout. And from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest strengths and weakness of Masonry? What do you see as the thing that I guess the biggest attraction that Masonry has for the modern person, or the person trying to improve themselves? And then what do you think is one of the biggest drawbacks that we have as to the way we practice it, especially here in America?
Yeah, drawbacks or strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I guess, it would be strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
It's more what we're looking for.
Yeah, so I think, if you look at other, let's say, occult orders, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Ordo Templi Orientis, which, as I say, was initially conceived as a Masonic college of rites in Germany. These have never attracted a large number of people. And most of them, although those two are still going in very, especially the Golden Dawn, in very fragmented ways, most of them just collapse and die. And Freemasonry has been going for 300 years, and even more if you consider it sort of prehistory. But one of the reasons that is, first of all, there is no guru, which is good, and you're open. It's open to your interpretation to a certain degree. But it's, I would say, it does, unlike occult orders, which try to connect us to the transcendent or the mysterious through, say, occult sigils, strange symbols, etc. The sigils that are for particular angels or demons, etc., which take us away from the world. Freemasonry reconciles us with the world. The world is not this lump of mud. We're not just in this secular world without meaning. But it reminds us that the world is the place where we can transcend, where we can reach some kind of awakening. The Zen notions, samsara is nirvana. And I think we're very disassociated from the world and from our own bodies today, and I think that is one of the reasons why it's kept going, that it reconciles us with the world and tells us that it's not a meaningless place, it's actually a place of meaning, and that we can explore ourselves. And so I think those are the positives. I would say that men are very much looked down upon today and regarded as the originators of all evil in the world. And I've met men all across America who, when I talk about fatherhood, there's a lot of pain there, and I think society doesn't realize and doesn't want to recognize that there's an awful lot of suffering and pain in men, and that men need good examples of other men in a male environment to sort of overcome this pain. And if you look at societies, even before recorded history, as far as we know, men have always had some kind of a right of initiation into manhood, and boys going off together in the wilds, living wild for a couple of years, overcoming extreme sort of pressures to survive, and in the modern world, we really have nothing like that. But I'll say personally, and I don't think Freemasons would usually phrase it like this, but I can certainly say that for myself, it's been a very healing experience. That I get to be around men who are decent and that an exemplar of just a decency, and that's been a healing experience for me. And I think just men need that. I think that's important, although obviously there will be pressures to change that. I think American Freemasonry is a lot stronger than British Freemasonry. I was initiated in America, but it's more adaptable. As I say, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Fraternal Review. I just took that over about 6 months ago. It became permanent about a month ago. And one of the great things that the Fraternal Review always tries to do, and has tried to do for several years, is to think outside the box. So they've had issues on pop culture, men's style, as well as Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and the more usual ones. We're doing an issue out next month that's on subculture, so it'll be punk, heavy metal, and Freemasonry, and I think American Freemasonry is much more able to be flexible and think outside the box. The Masonic cons would be another great example. As far as I know, they don't exist in Great Britain, and it's been enormously beneficial for the members, and it's really helped reignite a lot of enthusiasm in the fraternity. And so I think it can be much more flexible, can think outside the box, and all of that should be encouraged, because the less that happens, the more likely it is to just go into a radical decline. Obviously, some of the negatives would be we have a lot of very expensive real estate that may not be able to be kept up in decades to come. And we might need to be a lot more flexible in that regard. But and I think that, another thing is that we're perceived as being a very old-fashioned society. And I think one of the dangers of addressing that is that you try and present yourself as sort of cool and hip, which is what the Church of England really did in England. And now nobody goes to church because basically they say the same things that you'll see on the TV. So if there's nothing different about it, why do you need to go? And it's almost not a religion; it's just sort of a social club, and or at least that's how it presents itself. And Freemasonry could be in danger of doing the same thing, that we believe whatever is in fashion this month, and then it will change, and then we'll be stuck with that. But I think one way to respond to today is to really make it clear that what we're doing is something very archetypal, and it's very necessary for young men, and it's a place where young men can come to develop themselves and to have good examples of manhood and to contribute as well. There's a lot of this idea of, I don't want to be a joiner. Oh, good, because you should be a contributor. Why aren't you? A lot of, you get people who come and say, I only came for the magic and I didn't find anything about what I wanted there. It's like, well, then they'll say, I wanted to hear talks on Freemasonry and the occult. Well, 6 months after I was made a Master Mason, I gave my first talk at a lodge on Freemasonry and runes. Why didn't you do the same? Why do you think that it's kind of a substitute television where you can go and just consume stuff? So,
well, and actually that is it's something I think we've all noticed, is that some guys, they want to experience the transformation without participating in the transformation. And
that's right, yeah.
It's the participation that leads to the transformation.
Definitely, yeah.
Because we see it all the time, right? Everyone wants to go see a degree, but nobody wants to help in the degree.
Yeah.
One of the things you talk about in your book is the power of memory, how it defies time and defies death.
Right.
And so I was wondering, and how it's a very important part of the initiatic process.
Right.
I guess Masonry focuses a lot on memory, right? There's an expectation there.
Yeah.
I guess, would you mind elaborating more on that? The role of memory in transformation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are two kinds of memory in this regard, and one is developing the memory and memorizing a ritual, right? Or in regard to, say, classical education, or you think even in America 50 years ago or a century ago, many people would have memorized the Bible back to front, or in Islam, many even children will memorize the Quran back to front as well, word for word, the entire Quran, and with the in India as well. The Vedas at one point were not written down; they were memorized, even though they're enormous. And most, in fact, probably every culture was at one point illiterate, and all of their culture was transmitted from generation to generation through memory and word for word. So, on the one hand, memory is acquiring a certain amount of knowledge that can kind of gestate in the subconscious. And new creative ideas come through that, right? So, what is creativity? Well, it at least depends on getting a lot of different material together, and then something eventually will click, and you'll get a new idea. So memory is important for preserving a culture, but in terms of civilizations, you need memory to create these new ideas that will kind of renew a culture as well, renew a civilization. But beyond that, let's say in a ritualistic sense, I mean, of course, yes, you want to memorize your part in a ritual so you can do your part, but beyond that, memory is there's something more significant, or there's a different kind of memory. So if you think, for example, of a footprint that might be impressed in some moss that might last 10,000 years, memory is something that is sort of archetypal. If you look at Norse mythology, there's an episode where the god Odin cuts out his eye and throws it into the well of Mimir, and Mimir means the rememberer. So it's about memory, and he also at one point carries the severed head of Mimir with him and makes it speak so that he can learn particular knowledge. And this is a memory, it's not Odin's memory, it's a kind of archetypal memory that exists before the gods, before there is anything almost. And that's the kind of memory that we experience in the Masonic ritual. I would say, yes, we memorize a part, but going through it, you are, in a sense, remembering something archetypal, which is why it impresses itself upon us. As I say, even before recorded history, there were male societies where men went through rituals, and if you look at the symbolism, masculine symbolism, it's always there's some element of death, of encountering danger, and often the fire or the sun. And if you look at Freemasonry, you have the symbolism of death, of encountering danger in some way. Maybe it's a ritualistic act, but it's still this symbolic act that really resonates throughout, even before recorded history. And you have the light maybe instead of fire, you have the great lights, as it were. And so, in a sense, what you do when you go through a Masonic ritual. And I would say that this is in sharp contrast to many occult orders, which seems to be much more kind of made up in a sense. When you go through a Masonic ritual, you're going through something that, yes, historically speaking, is 300 years old, or if you want to go back into sort of proto-Masonry, another 300 or 400 years. But it's really much more ancient and archetypal than that. You can find parallels in societies across the world going back thousands of years. It's one of the annoying and intriguing things about Freemasonry is everybody has their own view of the real origins of Freemasonry, and very often, almost always, in fact, it just relates to their own sort of familial line. So if someone's Scottish, they say it's from Scotland. If someone's Arabic, they say it's from the Middle East. And if someone's Chinese, they say it's from Confucianism. But yeah, and of course it's annoying because it can't originate in 100 different places, and there's been hundreds of different theories about where it really originated, despite all the evidence, really, let's be honest. And yes, it's annoying historically, but I think what that also says is Freemasonry looks like all of these other spiritual traditions, past and present, but all of these other spiritual traditions, they don't often look like each other. Freemasonry with its 3 pillars in a fellowcraft degree, it might look like, or more generally, it might look like the Kabbalah or the Kabbalistic tree of life. But, the 2 pillars and light turn up in esoteric Shiite mythology as well. So it looks like that. But esoteric Shiite mythology doesn't look a lot like Kabbalah. Or, another theory says, well, it came from the ancient Norse and they represent the 3 gods. Well, ancient Norse mythology doesn't look anything like Shiite mythology or Shiite religion or esotericism. But both of these apparently look quite like Freemasonry. And what that says, as annoying as it can be, is that, in my mind, it really has embodied something very ancient and very archetypal, and there isn't really anything like that around today. When I read the Golden Dawn rituals, I can kind of see where they got it from. If I read the Wiccan rituals, I can see that they took it from the Golden Dawn, Freemasonry, and Aleister Crowley, and some new and pagan mythology. But with Freemasonry, I think it's sort of stranger than that, and sort of more archetypal than that. And I think that's another reason it survived, actually.
Okay, well, and that's an interesting concept about the archetype and the different archetypes that we look back to, in the fact that people seem to associate the origin of Freemasonry with whatever their personal bent is, right? It's almost like a confirmation bias. But maybe
sure.
It's syncretic. Freemasonry is syncretic because it's these archetypes have branched into, they're the core archetypes of humanity who have branched into all these other cultures, and then we bring it back together. So it's like confusing the effect with the cause, right?
Possibly.
Right.
I mean, there are parallels to other cultures. That's certainly true.
All right, and Gabriel, do you have any other questions you want to do before we wrap up?
I have a bunch, but none that I think we can cover in a reasonable time that respects Angel's schedule. So maybe we'll have to revisit this someday.
Sure. Yeah, you can just let me know.
Absolutely. Well, so folks, you can find more about Angel's work and his books at angelmillar.com, which is ANGELMILLAR.com. He's got 2 books out, or he's got several books out, but the 2 showcase books, kind of the primary stars of his corpus of work, are The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in the Age of Chaos, and The 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality, Craftsman, Warrior, and Magician. Both are available on Amazon. Angel, are those available in any local bookstores, do you know, in case you guys want to go buy in person?
Yeah, that I don't know. I mean, they're available on Amazon.com, and you can get it through IndieBound, which will probably ship from any local bookshop. But I'm not sure how many local bookshops there are.
Yeah, I was going to say, folks, if you have a local bookstore near you, go to them and say, hey, there's this guy called Angel out there. He wrote some really interesting books. I want these, and have them order them for you. Support your local bookstores, folks. So, but you can, if you want to learn more about us, you can find us at fortworthlodge.com, and you can learn more about our educational symposium, TexasMasonicon.com, spelled TexasMasonIcon.com, and that's coming up on August 19th and 20th of this year at the Fort Worth Masonic Temple. And if you want to reach us and shoot us an email, you can email us at info148@fortworth148.org. This is Gabe Jagush signing off.
This is Billy Hamilton signing off.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Roger, 0J, and I feel fine.
Nice to be in orbit.